Hi, everyone. So, Amy and I are here today doing our Ask an Attorney question and answer. And we're here with Grant Vanderyat. And we're so excited to have you
Thank you.
here. Thank you so much. And I'll let you kind of tell them a little bit about you.
Sure. My name is Grant Vanderyat. I'm an attorney. I'm a supervising attorney in a medium-sized boutique law firm in Castle Rock, and I practice most types of law. I have 26 years of experience in real estate in particular. I work closely with the agents here at Berkshire Hathaway to go through things like your leases and your overall strategy. We look at tax planning concepts. We look at asset protection type concepts. So more or less an all-around general practitioner.
Great. So, we asked Grant to come and answer a few questions for us. So, our first question is, what new landlord tenant laws do I need to address this year?
That's a great question. And actually, there's been a lot of recent laws that just passed by the General Assembly. Um, in particular, the General Assembly in 2023 passed three major laws. They aim to provide more protections and rights for renters in the state, as well as clarify some of the existing rules and regulations that have been in place for several years. So let's take a look at a few of those and see how those are going to impact the investors. The first one is SB 23-184. This is for the rental tenants. This law regulates the fees that landlords are allowed to charge to the rental applicants, such as background check fees, credit reports, and application processing. Landlords can only charge the actual cost of these services, and they must be provided with receipts and invoices upon demand by the applicant. The landlord must also notify the applicants for the reason if they were to reject any applications. They must limit those background checks to 7 years of rental history and 5 years of criminal record history. These are major changes. The law also requires landlords to provide a signed copy of the lease within 7 days. There's been some issues with landlords not providing documents quickly enough. Any payments by cash or money order, you now have to provide a receipt. There's a notice period that's been increased to 10 days. Actually, the 10 days has been increased to 60 days if you don't have a written lease agreement. There's also some income requirements that have passed. SB 23-184 sets limits on how much income a landlord is allowed to demand from an applicant tenant. They're capped at double the cost of rent. This law also changed the amount that you're allowed to ask as a security deposit. It defines what is a security deposit and puts limits on those. There's a lot that's changed this year that fundamentally changes what is allowed for a landlord to have in their lease, and it comes with a lot of teeth. The violations have been defined as civil rights violations, and those are enforced by the Attorney General and also the Civil Rights Division, and they can come with criminal consequences. So definitely connecting with an attorney, connecting with a professional. If you're operating in the landlord investment industry, you definitely need to get professional help. Don't write your lease on your own. Don't take a lease from the internet at this point. They have not been updated. There are major updates. The statutory penalty for violating these is $2,500, and it's payable to the tenant. So tenants are going to be incentivized to catch you on some of these laws.
So, if I have a tenant with a lease currently in place, I'm going to contact you or my attorney and have my lease updated right now. We're not going to wait until
Right
the
now,
lease is
don't
up.
wait. One of the big changes that came out in these new laws is mandatory arbitration clauses, which were a great way for landlords to previously reduce their overall exposure. They're now void. The law says you cannot mandate arbitration for these tenants, and that's going to raise the cost as far as litigation. But what you need to know of right now is it's a $2,500 penalty if you get caught by a tenant that you have this term in your lease, and it's an affirmative defense. And the attorneys, whenever there's a dispute with your eviction or your lease, the attorneys are required to tell these tenants of these new rights. So they're going to go through their lease, they're going to find them, you're going to get reported. Avoid that mess, work with a professional up front.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the new tenant laws. Do you want to go into a little more detail about some of the new laws that are coming down?
There's restrictions on what can be placed into your lease.
Okay.
And we talked a little bit about that, where you can't have, for example, a mandatory arbitration clause. So now they've come out and they've said certain terms you just can't have. Um, that can include particular late penalties, uh, penalties for uh, failure to give proper notice for a renewal. There's a whole list of them that have been brought in. There's restrictions now on how you process the applications. So, um, the tenants, for example, are allowed to demand a copy of the application, and you're required to give them the same benefit. So if the tenant applied to 5 different companies and they bring it in and it's within 30 days old, you have to recognize that without charging them a fee now. So there's just a lot of nuanced changes. They have a huge impact on the industry generally, and it's too much for somebody coming in who's got a regular day job to try to stay on top of what just happened. Uh, you know, these are going to change everybody's leases, and every single landlord has to change them. I know this is sad, but right after the law went into effect, I had a tenant who was trying to leave, and I couldn't believe it. My demand letter to the landlord was 17 pages detailing all of the ways that his lease renewal violated this new law. And it was just days after it went into effect.
Okay. So I really need to get my lease updated. How much is it going to cost me to have somebody like you write
So
up my lease?
I charge hourly. I'm $4.75 an hour right now. That's the rate of all the law firms in my company. Um, with lease renewals, the way that I do it is I will create a lease template that complies, and then from there I customize it. So it's not like you'd be paying me to create a brand new lease. I'll go through several different styled templates, make sure that those are compliant, and then prepare those and have them available for other folks. So somewhere in the range of $500 to $1,000 for a lease.
Okay, which for all that offers and the peace of mind that that offers as a landlord, that doesn't sound like very
Yeah,
much.
it's definitely worth it.
Yeah.
The penalties for a single mistake, $2,500. You don't need to go there.
Okay. So as somebody who uses a property manager to manage some of my real estate, my investment properties, am I still responsible for knowing these laws, or can I just assume that my property manager knows them and has updated my leases?
Wonderful question. So the reality is, as an investor, you're responsible. You have to be compliant, and your agent has to be compliant. The really great benefit of using a licensed real estate agent as your property manager is that they come with insurance. So if they made a mistake, it's their errors and omissions policy that kicks in. And if you're dealing with a reputable, honest real estate agent, they probably will come to you and say, look, I made a mistake. It was my mistake. I'm going to own that, and I'm going to file a claim against my own insurance and make you right. And that's the professional, ethical thing to do. So I always tell every landlord that I interact with that if they are not working with a licensed professional, they are foolish.
Do I need to have an attorney write my lease, or can I use one I find on the internet or just write on my own?
I would certainly not recommend that you write one on your own. Uh, at this point, AI is not caught up either, so don't rely on AI. You need to have people who are up to date to the minute. It's been 42 days since the last change in the law. Um, you know, AI was updated a year ago, right? So it's not current. You're going to need to be speaking with an attorney. Don't do it on your own.
What are the benefits and limitations of setting up an LLC?
That's a big question. LLCs can be great when they are properly set up. More than 90% of the LLCs that I look at have had major flaws. So when I talk about LLCs, I'm assuming that they're set up properly, and that's a major assumption. LLCs can provide you with some protection when it comes to litigation. They Depending on how you set them up, they can be easy to manage. They're definitely easier to create. The downside is that if you make a mistake, then you lose your corporate protections. You can get double taxed. So these are not things that should be taken lightly. They're sophisticated entities. There may be alternatives that you want to look at. I definitely recommend to most investors a different strategy for protecting their assets than using LLCs. In particular, I'm finding a lot of the LLCs that have mistakes in them leave a wide open exposure to title fraud. So if you're watching TV and you're seeing commercials about you need title fraud insurance, the reason is so many people hold their real estate in an LLC, and if they didn't record the documents properly, they are very vulnerable.
Okay. So is that something that I could come to you to help me do it correctly as well?
For sure. We do comprehensive legal, financial, and estate planning services. We look at the entire portfolio of what you're getting into, and we strategize about how to make your taxes more efficient, how to make your families more harmonious. We look at, minimizing conflict within the family. We look at long-term planning, short-term planning, all of that, comprehensive.
Okay, great. We talked a little bit about an LLC, and maybe that's not the best way to set up my investment properties for all people. What are some other options to protect myself as a landlord?
Yeah, great follow-up question. Colorado is one of the best places in the nation for estate planning. Trusts in Colorado have a special rule that allows for property to not be required to vest in the name of a person for 1,000 years. What that means is you can have an asset protection dynasty styled trust in Colorado that can do everything that you have been turning to an LLC for, except the judges actually respect it when it comes to creditor protections. You actually get lots of tax benefits. They're really simple to manage, so there's no seriously particular details of how you have to keep minutes or you have to have an operations agreement. So those types of things are alternatives that I think are going to be better suited for most investors. And they don't expose you to kind of the horror stories that are happening with LLCs.
Can you have a trust situation even if there are multiple owners in the investment property that are not necessarily related? Like I own a property with 3 other people. And so if I wanted to set that property up into a trust, can we do that even with our different
You can.
heirs?
Sure, yeah. You can structure a trust that is specific for an investment, and it can also receive 1031 money, and you can identify it as a tenancy in common in the asset that's in the trust, for sure.
Okay. What are the benefits and limitations of getting an umbrella insurance policy to cover my investments?
I love this question. A lot of people think that umbrella insurance is, as it kind of describes, that it creates this broad level of protection over your single peril. But in fact, it's less like an umbrella and more like a flagpole. A telescoping flagpole goes straight up. So if you have a single peril named in your underlying insurance policy and you add an umbrella, it takes the named peril that's in your original policy and raises the dollar value of any claim, the coverage for that claim. Most people think that they're getting all these other things that would be included in that policy. They're not. They're just getting more money to be paid out. The reason I like thinking of it as a flagpole is the taller you go, the more insurance money you put on it, the more likely you're going to get struck by lightning. Attorneys will look for the highest flagpole around. We're going to look for who has the most money on the line, and you might actually find yourself attracting more lawsuits because you've got too much of an umbrella.
Wow, that's a great analogy.
Thank you.
Can I turn down a potential tenant just because I don't like them, maybe have a bad feeling about them?
I don't recommend that you reject somebody because you have a bad feeling about them. You definitely need to be documenting your reasons, and there are statutory reasons that you can't reject somebody. So you need to be very careful about how you go about that. Some of the recent laws, in particular when it comes to the 200% income to rent ratio that's now been mandated, it actually very subtly says that the inquiry into their income ratio is it's strictly for the purpose of identifying whether they qualify for that ratio. What they're not saying is more concerning to me than what they've said in the statute, because there's penalties for violating this. If you go further and you say, I don't like the source of your income, let's say it's government welfare source. If you don't want to be renting to Section 8 tenants, for example, you might be violating this new law and be subjected to some pretty scary criminal prosecution. So documenting why you're rejecting and making sure that those reasons are valid legal reasons is going to become more and more important as we move forward. It's a complex question because every municipality is different. For example, we're in Denver right now. You definitely can't discriminate based on political registration in Denver. That's a separate law that Denver has that most of the rest of the state doesn't. So when we're talking about discriminating and what are the right ways or right reasons for being able to tell somebody you don't want them as a tenant, you really do have to look at the locality where you're at and make sure that you're in compliance with their rules. And then from there, you work to the rest of the state and the federal rules. So the standard ones, race, religion, that sort of thing, obviously we want to make sure that you're compliant with those. But there's a lot of subtle ones. Gender is an issue in Colorado now, and you cannot discriminate based on somebody's gender.
So if I have a tenant who applies, so I actually had this happen. I had a tenant who applied for, renting my unit, and the tenant was a minority protected class, but they wanted to rent without putting down the security deposit or the first month's rent. They wanted to wait 3 months until they had to make a payment. So is that a legal reason that I can turn down a tenant because they're asking to postpone payments for 3 months?
You would say, most people would say it's an easy answer. That's not going to be discriminatory. But the test is actually whether there's disparate treatment in your answer. So disparate treatment is actually a lot harder. When a claimant files a suit against you, they're going to open you up and say, I would like to look at all of your documents and find out how you handled the exact same situation for people of different races, genders, age, all of that. And you have to be able to prove that you treated it in exactly a equal treatment basis.
So keeping really good records of phone calls, emails.
Correct.
Okay. And then how much does an eviction cost me as a landlord, and do I need to use an attorney for the eviction process?
Great question. And this ties back into a lot of what we've already talked about. If you're structured as an LLC, the LLC cannot operate in a pro se capacity. So an LLC can't represent itself. It's always going to require an attorney to be present. I'm going to say that you should always have an attorney handle these types of issues. Evictions, they range as far as cost based on the locality. The municipalities control how much the filing fees are. As a general rule of thumb, right now we're looking at about $350 in actual court costs to file the eviction. To give you an idea, 10 years ago, the entire eviction was about $400. The new laws have compounded the amount of work that attorneys have to do. There's now mandatory disclosures. It's no longer a 4-page document. It's now 28 pages that we have to submit to the tenant. That has expanded the cost if you're using an attorney. Our firm, we charge about $1,800 for an eviction, and the timeline is also drastically different. There's all kinds of new compliance aspects that the landlords have to comply with. So definitely using an attorney. Don't do that on your own. If you make a technical mistake, you're going to get thrown out.
Okay. And what is the most litigated action towards landlords? Like, what, as a landlord, what actions are the most common that I would do as a landlord that would be the most litigated?
I would say security deposits and how you handle those are a hot issue. I would say things like habitability, the statute of habitability, are another major issue. where I see the biggest amount of litigation coming in the next 5 years, I really believe that all of these new laws that came out with new tenants' rights are going to be civil rights violations that we're going to have to protect investors from.
Let's talk a little bit more about the new tenant laws coming down. So, as an investor and as somebody who owns a lot of real estate, it can seem a little intimidating and scary. So, what are some things that I can do to protect myself?
Well, we talked about kind of the horrors of an umbrella policy, but getting a good investment property policy, a dwelling policy with solid coverage is a great way to cover some of those risks. Structuring so that you have a trailing stop loss in your asset portfolio is another way of doing that. I would say connecting with sophisticated realtors, connecting with sophisticated financial planners, doing comprehensive legal strategy planning, all of that is going to be critical to making sure that you're successful. And at every phase, you're going to have, if you're setting up proper trailing stop losses, you're going to set up a situation where you can only succeed and not lose. Make sure that as you're building wealth, you're protecting it as you go.
And that's a great point, because that's what Amy and our goal with our classes that we do every month. We are building a team of people to help you build wealth and protect your wealth. And so we have great experts like Grant and financial planners and CPAs and insurance agents. And so that's all part of our plan to be kind of that team of your forever real estate agent and your team for building wealth. So it's really important.
So when I started in real estate, this wasn't too long ago, actually. It was about the year 2000. And I was buying and selling real estate about every 11 to 15 days. There's been some rule changes that says you can't do a lot of that. But just think, I was paying $40,000 to $60,000 a house, and I've held on to a lot of those properties without a lot of headaches. I'd say 5% of tenants can be a nightmare, but the rest are really, really good. And to this date, I have no issues with my tenants. I'm in the final throes of my amortized mortgage. So, give me 5 more years and it's all going to be cash flow cream, right? Just no debt obligations. It's almost all paid off. It is going to be a fabulous retirement because of how I invested young and early into real estate. And the benefits of investing in real estate compound, right? So when we're talking about all of these hazards and all of these risks, don't get down on yourself. There's actually a vast amount of wealth that can be created in real estate, and it happens pretty quickly. Rents go up, the value of the dollar is going down, which means your debt value is going to go down relative to your earning capacity. So you're getting more money in than your mortgage is costing, and you can start buying these down. You can start accelerating the payoff of your mortgage and get into positive cash flow world. And that's where every investor really needs to be.
So I definitely want to still invest in real estate, but I just want to make sure that I have professionals behind me so that I'm doing everything the correct way.
Right. And the nice thing is, the real estate brokers here have been exposed. You know what all the pitfalls are. So this might be new to your audience as far as the nightmare stories and all of the downside, but it's not at all new to what you guys handle day in and day out. And so when there's an issue, you can pick up on the subtleties and be like, there's a problem with this. We need to talk, right? And guide your clients to making solid decisions. They may not know even that they've just sidestepped a potential hazard, but you're going to be all over it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Grant. Thanks for
You're
coming
welcome.
in and
Thanks for
sharing
having
your
me.
expertise with us. And we will share your contact information so that they can make sure that they have everything done correctly.
And thank you for your time.
Thanks.